And thank you, Deb, so much for sharing that profound and wonderful reading with us this morning. There's a new day is dawning. There's a new way to see. Jen Johnson just asked me to ask you, does everybody have the words to that? Hannah, were actually printed on the, you couldn't find them. So does everybody have this green insert? Okay, just make sure you do have them, because there's some important data on that new insert besides those lyrics for A New Day is Dawning. We have a special farewell party coming up to our own dear Reverend Gloria. January the 8th, we're having one 10 o'clock service to say a formal sort of farewell to Gloria in this particular role before they take off to Costa Rica for 2 months, which is really hard. But so January 1st, one service. So just so you all get it, next Sunday we won't be having worship. It's the only Sunday that we ever cancel worship for, because we'll have had 4 services of worship on Saturday night. So we won't have a worship service next Sunday. And then on January 1st, which is New Year's Day, and this is my payback to Gloria. She has to lead that service on New Year's Day. Gloria is going to lead that service. Well, we're going to be together on New Year's Eve, so I don't know if I'll be here or not. But Gloria will be leading one service on New Year's Day at 10 o'clock. And then on January the 8th, we're going to have another service at 10 o'clock as a way of just saying a bit of a formal farewell to this wonderful role and ministry that you provided. And we're hoping to see lots of you two birds still in the future. But it's just a time of transition in their lives. And there's some other, so there's also a dress rehearsal, noticing for Christmas Eve. So this screen sheet is just important. Wanted to make sure that all of you have that. Just to note, we have these wonderful United Church women who are a part of our community. We also have a group of wonderful United Church men in our community as well. And I'm going to invite all our United Church men to stand for a second as well. Those who are part of this more informal network, just stand up, guys, if you're part of, if you hook up with the United Church Men's Group. Absolutely, a wonderful group of guys as well, and they were serving breakfast at the Brunswick Street Mission downtown on Saturday morning. Do all sorts of wonderful stuff, provide a lot of the same things, fellowship and learning and growth and service. Just a big hand of celebration for you guys in our midst too. So thank you, guys. Yeah. So every now and again, I like to watch an old movie and go back to the oldie goldies from my youth. And it wasn't too long ago, and I watched the old movie with Anthony Quinn from, I think it's 1964 or 1967, called Zorba the Greek. Do you remember that one? Oh, that was an awesome, awesome, awesome film. And for those of you who don't go back to that vintage at all, it's basically the story of a kind of a young, bookish, intellectual Englishman who takes who has a job on a Greek island operating a mine on this island. And so he takes some time off from being in the north and from his academic studies to go and learn about real life and on this Greek island. And he meets this Greek fella, Zorba, who knows how to live life to the fullest, right? And while the two get to become good friends, they're quite the opposite, and Zorba has a lot to teach his young English academic about life. But they end up living in an inn together, and the inn is run by this woman. And throughout the course of the movie, this proprietor, this woman, becomes ill, and she's heading towards death. And she's become very close friends with both Zorba and the young Englishman. And they've been off working in the mines, and she becomes ill, and she's kind of waiting for them to show up and just spend some time with her. And she watches the door, and she's waiting for them for a period of time until one day they finally do show up. And when they get there, the young Englishman, he's just, what do you do? What do you say to someone who's dying? He doesn't know what to say to someone who's dying. He hasn't really experienced life in its depths in that kind of way. And so he comes up to her and tries to make small talk, and he tries to cheer her up and to encourage her to think about getting well. And Zorba turns to him in the course of that conversation and says, "Listen, boss, stop beating around the bush. Tell her why we're really here." And it clicks, and it's one of those moments in a beautiful film. It's a moment of deep life learning in which the young Englishman takes the woman's hand, and he holds it in his hands, and he looks at her and he says, quite spontaneously, "We're here because we love you." It's one of those deeply poignant and learning-filled moments. This fourth Sunday of Advent is the Sunday always associated with love. Right over here. It's also a Sunday on which the Christian faith and the Christian church recalls poor little old Israel, the country, the nation that is at the heart of this entire scripture, this entire biblical witness that is so much a part of our tradition and that we have followed ever since. Poor little Israel is this tiny little country, this tiny little group of people in the Middle East who, prior to the New Testament story of Jesus' birth, have gone through 1,000 years, from the time that they left Egypt under Moses to the time of the birth of Jesus. They have gone through one crisis after another. They've gone through this, ups and downs, ups and downs. They've had conquests and wars and struggles and famines and economic disaster, both in the corporate sort of collective manner and also in people's individual lives and at the individual level. Their life has been a roller coaster, basically, of disaster. And what the final culminating disaster is that they get invaded by the empire. Darth Vader comes in and takes over. That's Darth Vader in those days was Caesar Augustus, the Roman emperor, right? The Roman emperor comes in with his mighty armies and forces and just flattens and conquers the whole land, and everybody is in subservience to the Roman Empire. It can't get any worse. And it's in the midst of this particular moment in Israelite history that this group of people feel this deep, deep hunger and yearning to know that somebody is on their side, that somebody is rooting for them, that somebody loves them, and the somebody they're really hoping for is it's God. They want to know that they are loved by God, that their lives aren't just an ongoing, unmitigated disaster, that the life at the heart of the universe does care for them and is looking out for them. And it's precisely into this circumstance where the Christmas story that we've been following over these last weeks begins. It's a story of how the angel Gabriel appears to a young, unfamous, humble, totally unnoticeably otherwise woman named Mary. And the angel comes to Mary and says, listen, Mary, you have been chosen by the divine to give birth to a very, very special child. And that special child is going to be the one who is going to tell the people that, yes, indeed, you are meaningful, you are significant, despite this continuous roller coaster disaster of your lives, not just in recent years, but over the centuries, that you are loved and cared for by God. And so it comes to birth. Mary gives birth to this little boy who becomes an adult who goes on to change the world with a particular message, and that particular and precise message is that our human lives are not simply abstract, materialistic anomalies of material, totally non-meaningful, sporadic kind of unfolding of existence, but that our human lives are indeed the creation of, the unfolding of a deep divine impulse, a deep divine intention to create human beings, and that the source of all of this life that we call God does indeed love us, care for us, have meaningful intention for our lives, and that this was the case for little tiny Israel. Margaret Cisco, who is writing in a Sunday Observer magazine for one of the churches in the States, tells a story about her grandfather's family who came from Czechoslovakia when he was a young man. And he used to tell his grandchildren the story about how his family in Czechoslovakia had owned a large farm. And on this farm, there had been this beautiful cherry tree. And over the course of the years, this cherry tree stopped blooming and stopped producing cherries. And his father was quite distressed over this fact because they had loved this cherry tree. And so one year, the grandfather says to his children now in the States, he says, my father and me, when I was just a boy, we came home after the Christmas Eve service, and my father dragged me by the hand, and we went to that cherry tree, and my father shook the tree and said, wake up, tree, Jesus is born. And he says, I was just a little boy, I didn't know what was going on, but the grandfather said, you know what? Next May, that tree blossomed and produced these beautiful cherries. Well, Margaret says he used to tell that story, and then quite mysteriously and crazily, in the States, he had a tree, a cherry tree, that went through the same process. And she says, I recall, she says, we went to church one Christmas Eve, and Granddad was ticked about his cherry tree, and he decided, I'm going to do what my dad did. And Margaret says, we were all together at the Christmas Eve service, and Granddad said, let's drive me home. I got to go and wake up that tree, just like my father did. And he goes home, and all the adult grandkids are in the car, and they're all kind of having a giggle and just waiting for Granddad. And he goes to his cherry tree, and he shakes it just like his father did years ago, and he says, wake up, cherry tree, Jesus is born. And everybody was laughing and having a good giggle, Margaret says. And that was the end of the story. Until 4 months later. Margaret said they totally forgot all about it. And she says, one day, it was June sometime, I was in a family gathering and with some of my other relatives, and it suddenly struck us, whatever happened to Granddad's cherry tree? And she says they told her, you know what? That little sucker blossomed, bore tons of cherries, and grandmother made cherry pies, tons of them, and they were delicious. How does the universe, how does the divine reach out to tell us that we are not just these material, spontaneous, insignificant eruptions of matter that when we die go back into the earth and that's the end of it? How does the universe, we tend to think that sometimes, right? We get into a real funk and we say there's nothing more to life, there's nothing in the hereafter, there's nothing before, this is just kind of a random eruption of quantum realities, and there's no intention or meaning or significance to any of this. Woody Allen, I think, what's his line? He says something to the effect, life is full of suffering, misery, and loneliness, and it's all over too soon. That's all it is, right? We get into that kind of funk sometimes, right? And we think that's all it is, and there's nothing more. First we're born, and then we die, and that's the end of it, right? And if our hearts and minds are open, it's in that kind of circumstance that the universe and the source behind the universe can reach out to us in an infinity of ways. Synchronicitous little moments that have meaning for all of us in our own individual ways. It might be a cherry tree that comes to bloom. It might be a bird that perches on your window, a very significant bird that you haven't seen there in years in a particularly crisis-driven moment in your life. It might be a particular dream, or it might be the reaching out of someone who touches your life with caring and meaning. But in all these kinds of circumstances, it's the source of life reaching out to us in a multitude of ways, an infinity of ways, actually, giving us the message, you are loved, you are cared for. Trust the larger depths of life, because there's so much more to all of this than can ever meet the eye. And that's what the Christmas story is all about. That infinite intelligence and power and source at the heart of existence reaches into time and space, and in this particular example, gives birth to a child who ends up being the fulfillment of this longing that ancient Israel had for someone to tell them with conviction and power and with absolute certitude that they are loved, that they are cared for, that they are special in the eyes of God. And it's out of those experiences that, as Gloria said to us in the children's time, we learn that because we are loved, we are called to love. Love isn't simply an evolutionary kind of random thing that emerges within us to propagate the species. What Jesus shared with us is that love is the intention and the meaning that's rooted in the heart of reality itself, in the life of God. And therefore, love is the way in which life is intended to be lived if it's going to be lived with meaning and purpose and joy. And we have, and you know what the good news is? Is that there are billions of people on this planet, trillions of people on this planet, who are loving. Do you know that? Are you a loving person? Yes, you are. In little villages in India, in Aleppo, which is experiencing political disaster and military and economic disaster at the moment. Do you know how many people are caring for one another, are dragging friends through the rubble to a hospital to see a doctor, trying to help somebody get out of a city? Love is present, and it is manifesting all around the world. And when I talk about our United Church women, I talk about our United Church men. They're manifesting love in all sorts of ways, as do all of you. It's because the love is rooted in us. It's fundamental to our very being because God is fundamental to our being, and that's what Jesus came to tell us. Every time a little baby is born, every time a cherry tree blossoms, every time somebody reaches out to touch each other's heart or lives with goodness, you invite somebody over for Christmas dinner, you do something special for someone. Billions and trillions of opportunities and little ways in which love is revealed in the world. It's because what that child born in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago told us, that love is rooted in the heart of reality. It emerges out of the very being and heart of God, and it's rooted in our hearts. And when we live it and express it, then the world becomes a little bit brighter, a little bit better, a little bit more meaningful place that God intends for us all. Merry Christmas, my friends. Namaste. Amen.
Child of wonder, close your eyes. Rest here in my arms tonight. Someday you will save the world. But tonight I'll hold you right here in my arms. Precious miracle of life, child of love, gift of hope, the gift of light. Sing the skies above, and you were made for humankind. You will always be mine, child of love. Gabriel's promise has come true. God has blessed the world with you, and as I humbly hold you now, in my heart I know I'm holding heaven's child, precious miracle of life, child of love, gift of hope, the gift of light. Sing the skies above, and you were made for humankind. You will always be mine, child of love, precious miracle of light, child of love, gift of hope, the gift of light. Sing the skies above, and you were made for humankind. You will always be mine, child of love. Child of wonder, close your eyes.
That was beautiful. Thank you very much. For our community prayer today, I wanted to share with you just a personal story about music I was listening to this morning on CBC Weekend Morning, for any of you who caught it. I thought there were just some beautiful selections that really spoke to me. One was The Carpenter's Son. Another was What a Wonderful World, reminding me that love really does exist, and if we are open to it and open our hearts to it, we have the opportunity to both give and receive it. As I arrived at church, they played the Ben Kaplan version of Fairy Tale of New York, which I find the music beautifully haunting, but the story is actually quite sad, and it reminded me that while Christmas for many of us is a time of homecomings and joy and sharing and being with friends and family, we also need to remember those for whom it can be a sad and lonely time. So let us share our love with them. So I have a very brief prayer taken from Pete Blanding's song, A Carpenter's Son, speaking about the birth of Jesus. Let us pray. So this year, when you celebrate Christmas, think about all the good that he's done. Hang a star on the tree or just fall on your knees and give thanks for the Carpenter's Son. Amen.
So our closing hymn is Go Tell It on the Mountain, and that's in Voices United, number 43. We're doing all the verses, and you can rise as you are able and sing with us.
Thank you very much, Regenesis, for your beautiful leadership this morning. And Hannah, you did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Go now in peace and love as we entered into this last busy week of preparing not only for our own celebrations, but to celebrate the birth of Christ. Merry Christmas.
Our benediction is Go to the World, and if you don't know that song, we're all in the same boat. So that is Voices United, number 420, and we're singing verse 3. I